ready to roll? All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brenda Merritt. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Health, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here and to help moderate the discussion tonight. Before I begin, I want to first acknowledge that Dalhousie is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And I also want to acknowledge the histories and contributions and legacies of the African Nova Scotian people and communities who have been here for more than 400 years. So let's begin. I'll do a little introduction and then we'll get on with our event. So over the last few years, we've highlighted global gaps in healthcare. I'm sure that everybody has taken note of this. Stark inequities and prohibitive lack of reliable and accessible data, lags in development, manufacturing, and delivery of vaccines and therapies, frontline care, and more. With the faculties of medicine, health, and dentistry at Dalhousie, there's a concentration of health disciplines that is one of the largest in the country. It's a vibrant and collaborative community of professionals who are dedicated to advancing health education, care, and research to achieve better results for people, populations, and the healthcare system regionally, nationally, and internationally. Tonight's engaging conversation will tackle the questions: what is the biggest challenge that needs to be addressed right now in our healthcare system? What strong health outcomes look like? And how can research help to address the issues we are facing in the realm of healthcare? And now I'll introduce our guests. To my left is Dr. Brendan Leong, Associate Professor of the Department of Applied Oral Sciences in the Faculty of Dentistry and the School of Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Leong's current research program focuses on development of advanced tissue construct platforms and technologies to understand fundamental phenomena that govern tissue homeostasis and maladaptation in human disease. And I'm sure we'll learn more about what that means. Dr. Jeanette Boudreau is next in line here, Associate Professor with the Department of Microbiology and Immunology and with the Department of Pathology. Dr. Boudreau is an immunologist with an interest in developing immunotherapies for cancer. Her research group uses high-parameter imaging and quantitative techniques together with genetic analysis to define the features governing the immune response to cancer. Next, we have Dr. Leah Rock, Director and Assistant Professor in the School of Dental Hygiene in the Faculty of Dentistry here at Dalhousie. Dr. Rock's overall goal of her research is to facilitate discoveries that will advance early oral cancer detection biomarkers and identify effective intervention strategies to reduce the number of individuals with aggressive advanced stage disease. And I know we're expecting Dr. Rockwood as well, but he's not on, and he was going to join us remotely, but he's not online yet. When he comes on, we can introduce him, but I'll give his bio now. Dr. Kenneth Rockwood is a professor with the Division of Geriatric Medicine in the Department of Medicine and the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology. Dr. Rockwood is a member of the senior leadership team at Nova Scotia Health. He is the inaugural lead of the Frailty and Elder Care Network. So we're hoping that he will join us. All right. With those introductions underway, we'll start with a few remarks from each of the panelists, followed by a conversation, a few starting questions. And we'll take about 15 to 20 minutes to do that. And then we will move on to the question and answer from the audience here in the room and online. And I think the hashtag or the QR code will help you submit questions. Is that right? I'm looking to all my people up there. They're saying yes. Okay. So first of all, I'll ask each of the panelists to take 3 to 4 minutes. That's it, each, to have a few opening remarks. So we'll start with Dr. Leong.
Oh, great. I guess I want to start by saying it's great to be on a panel with scientists at different stages of helping improving health outcome. This is a really big problem, and it really takes experts from various different fields to solve it. So this is great, and we do collaborate. So we're not just here in this room tonight for one time. We do collaborate outside. And my area of expertise is in building model system to better understand the diseases. So really the context is for 99% of the labs that are doing medical research, they either do cells in a dish, which have been developed more than 100 years ago, which hasn't really changed, or they do it in animal system, and that we know have its limitations. So there really is nothing in between. So we either ask very simple question or we ask complex question, but those questions cannot be really well addressed by an animal system. So I kind of come in the middle to develop systems that we can ask very specific question on how cells interact in a reproducible way, but also in ways that that can mimic patient environment better, right? So we can, in general, build better system to mimic diseases, but one step further, we can build tissue that can mimic a specific patient's condition, right? So that's really where we're pushing into precision medicine, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that, but precision to me has two separate levels of meaning, and technology and all that kind of do both of them. Am I okay with that?
You're
good.
Okay. Very well done. Okay.
All right.
Take note, Dr. Boudreau and Leo Rock. So here we go. Okay, Dr. Boudreau, you are next for a few opening remarks.
Sure, watch how fast I can talk. So my name is Jeanette, and until I met Brendan, studied cells in a dish and mice. And more recently, when I sort of started my postdoc fellowship after I finished my PhD, I started studying human natural killer cells, which are my favorite immune cell in the whole world, honestly, and the future. But what I really learned first and foremost was that studying mice and studying humans are two different things. They both have their place in research, but on the continuum of research, unless the mouse people, as we call them, talk to the human people, in a meaningful way, research never really gets translated. And I think that the further I go along in my career, the more I realize that the mouse and the human people are nice and close together, but there's also the model systems people and the molecular people and the clinicians and the clinical trialists and the supportive healthcare people. And it really does take a village. And if we learned anything from the pandemic, it's that we can all talk to each other, and we can do that virtually. We don't have to be in the same room or the same faculty or the same place to do things. So in my research, I study human NK cells, and I have about a bazillion collaborators, one of whom is Brendan. And what we're trying to do is harness the power of the human immune system to cure cancer in a more precise way. So for those of you that, everybody has experienced someone that they love going through cancer treatment, and it is absolutely horrible, and it only works sometimes. So we're trying to improve that. And immunotherapy has been this new thing that has really revolutionized what's happening to patients with cancer, and it continues to do so. But the problem is that it's really, really expensive, and we don't have immunotherapies for everyone. And most of the time, the most effective therapies, so things like CAR T cells, require that one product be made for each person. And then, that's not even a cure guaranteed. So how do we scale this? And how do we scale this in a public healthcare system where we're trying to make this affordable and accessible to everyone? And that's where the NK cell comes in. So think about the NK cell as like the Swiss Army knife of the immune system. It's got all these tools, and you can pull them out, and you can use them in different combinations. And we all have these in our body. And the good news is I can take NK cells out of one person and put them into another person and get them to do their bidding there. But the question is, how do I know which one of those cells is the right thing for each person? And it's probably a collection of cells, if I'm being totally honest. So mice are problematic, right? Because mice are genetically inbred, they're all the same, they're not humans, and they have different NK cells. So we partnered with Canadian Blood Services so that we could study human NK cells, and we now have a library of human NK cells, and I can feel you, Brenda.
No, you're good, you're totally good.
But in order to do that, we work up these systems in vitro, but we need to also challenge these NK cells with something that looks like a real heterogeneous tumor that might exist in a human being. And so I partnered with Brendan to build those 3D model systems. And so now what we can do is study human natural killer cells killing human tumors in a real-time way where we can push and pull the system. And that's the stuff that I'm really excited to talk about today, but it's allowing us to talk more and more to our clinical colleagues and test multiple treatments for the same cancer to try to pick apart what the right thing is for each patient. And I'll stop there.
That's a really good introduction. I now have framed for two of the research programs here. So next, Dr. Rock.
Thank you. So what's really striking me is, although we prepared our introductions completely independently, the similarities that we all have, it's actually really exciting. My area of research, I work what I would like to think is a translational research program. And what I mean by that is trying to move discovery or move research from the bench side to the bedside, or in the case of dentistry, to the chair side. I'm interested in looking for biomarkers for not only early cancer detection, but also for a risk assessment as well. And this kind of leads into and builds on the concept of precision medicine, which is basically identifying those people who are at risk, often through molecular profiling, many different forms, but often molecular profiling, and then providing targeted, tailored treatments and interventions to those who have been identified at risk. And so taking kind of precision medicine, I would like to think, to the next level, isn't just about offering precision treatment and, tailoring therapeutics, but a new concept of not only chemotherapy, but chemoprevention. In other words, once we identify people who are at risk of an illness and they have a biomarker of being at risk, to provide them with a chemopreventative agent. And to that end, my lab is about to start a really exciting clinical trial where we are going to be exploring the use of metformin, which is a drug that's typically used to treat type 2 diabetes, to see if it can prevent the malignant transformation of oral precancerous lesions into full-blown cancer. And that might seem like a little bit of a stretch to some, but if you're familiar with metformin at all, there's a growing body of evidence that supports it, not only from a mechanistic perspective, but in retrospective trials and prospective trials in various solid organ tumors, including bladder cancer, kidney cancer, some breast cancers, certain colon cancers. And we are one of 10 sites in North America that is about to unroll a prospective trial for oral cancer. And I think I'll save the rest for the next round. Thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, is this one of the first clinical trials at Dow, or one of the early,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big deal. Okay, so I'm going to start off with questions for each of the panelists, and then we'll turn to the questions from the audience. So first, Dr. Liang, target discovery is very important. How is machine learning assisting with your research?
Thank you for the question. And that's really, the model development piece is really underpinning the bread and butter in my lab. And I at the end of my introduction, I talked about precision to me means two different things. So to me, precision in a model development sense means that, number one, are we modeling the right thing, right? So anybody can put cells in a dish and call it breast tumor, ovarian tumor, lung tumor, but is it really representing the real disease? Second, precision towards the need of the patient, right? So everybody come in with a disease that's a little bit different, right? Can we find a solution for that particular patient? So that's a broader sense of precision and a more specific sense of precision. So where it's really a pleasure to work with basic scientists, clinician, is that they keep feeding me information on what to build, right? So the collaboration really allows us to try to build the right thing. And a model is only good if it can predict what's going to happen next, right? And to do that, we need to have lots of data, but the data quality have to be very good as well. So we need to put in the right things. So for example, there will be slides from patient biopsy where we can see here are the tumor cells, here are the immune cells, all sorts of different cells, right? But number one, can we identify all of these cells? Do we have the power to know where all of these cells are? So this is the first point where AI comes in, right? So it's, it takes very powerful AI software to help us identify which cells these are, okay? And once we have that, we put it in our in vitro system, in a model system in the dish, a more sophisticated version of cells in the dish. And then we would look at them interact, right, to track them. So those movements, those interaction also require very powerful AI to look at them, to analyze them. So we need to have good data going in, and we need lots of them. So with a platform in the lab, we can really set up many different scenarios going forward. So you can imagine a patient might come in with a biopsy. We can take that biopsy and we can create from that patient cells multiple different models, and we can try different things, right? So this is what helps us compound from one patient into several different scenarios, so we can try which you cannot try with just one patient alone. So I think these are the examples where AI really helps. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. I have also noted that Dr. Kenneth Rockwood has joined us. Good evening, Dr. Rockwood. In just a few minutes ago, each of the panelists said a few opening remarks, about 3 to 4 minutes. Would you like to jump in and provide a few opening remarks?
Sure, I'll be brief. My name is Ken Rockwood. I'm a geriatrician. At the moment, I'm doing an outreach clinic in Sydney. And the number one issue that I think we should be addressing in healthcare in Nova Scotia is how we reform our bipartisan reluctance to engage with frail older adults who get acutely unwell. And this is something that has been forecast for a long time. Chickens are coming home to roost. And finally, it looks like with the current administration, we're actually going to start some steps that should have been taken some time ago, but we're glad to see them now, that allow us to reform the system in ways that we meet the needs of the people who actually get sick. So we've had tremendous success in healthcare by ever greater subspecialization, and the model of care there is that you get better and better and better at treating people who have one thing. But frail older adults have, by definition, multiple interacting medical and social problems. There's a skill set needed to look after those people. Absent that skill set, what happens is they face denigration. And we need to do better by offering care more relevant to the needs of people who are an increasingly large proportion of the patients that we see. And until we do that, we won't solve issues like ambulance offload delay and other things that are distracting the entire system now. Over.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. And I'm not sure if you were following along before you got online, but I'm just going through and asking each of the panelists some questions. And the next question is for Dr. Boudreau. The question is, can you elaborate on how your research with natural killer cell immunogenetics are harnessing the power of the human immune system to improve health outcomes?
Sure thing. So as I sort of mentioned before, I love natural killer cells, and I'm the world's biggest cheerleader for them. So if we think about a person undergoing a bone marrow transplant, you always hear this rhetoric around you need to find a match, right? That is the number one rule of giving someone a bone marrow transplant, is find a match. But we don't often think about what that means unless you are yourself a transplanter. So I spent some time working with a transplanter and figured out what that means. So what it means is that we have to match this set of genes called HLA. And there's these registries that search the globe for humans who are willing to donate their marrow. And you hit on these matches, and great news, the patient gets a transplant, which is great because that's the only way you can cure leukemia right now. It turns out, though, that even if you have all of your HLA genes matched, the outcomes for those patients are very different. And there's a number of reasons why this happens, but one of those reasons is natural killer cell immunogenetics. Because you can have whatever you want on the HLA chromosome, but over on a different chromosome that has nothing to do with HLA are the cure genes, and they control how NK cells work. And the products of each of those genes, the KIRs and the HLA, interact with each other, and they play off of each other, and they diversify what the NK cells can do. So even if you're drawing from the same gene pool, you and your siblings who are drawing from your biological parents' gene pool, you're getting a different set of cards that are shuffling from this genetic deck over and over again. So people, even related people, have different NK cells, and depending on your configuration, you might be more or less equipped to deal with, say, a cancer cell. So patients who are lucky enough to get a transplant that is consistent with tumor rejection, they go on to not relapse and do well, and some people get kind of a bad luck combo. But we're only just starting to understand that. Remember I said you can transplant NK cells between people, right? So you don't need to give everyone a bone marrow transplant. You can just give people NK cells, and people do this. This is happening in clinical trials. So what we're trying to do is figure out how those immunogenetics predict how those NK cells are going to function in their new host. And I should say that good is a context-specific definition, because good for cancer doesn't mean good for virus infection, for example. Okay, so that's great. That's really molecular and nitty-gritty, and the basic scientist is nattering on. How's that going to improve health outcomes, right? So in the health world, I think as we move into this era of precision medicine and immunotherapy and cellular therapies for cancer, the price tag is going up and up and up, and the ability of physicians to be able to deliver these care is, it's limited, right? So the question is one of scale. How do we scale this? And I would say that the NK cell genetic diversity is exactly in the Goldilocks zone. And by that I mean there's enough for it to matter, but not so much that we can't study it. So I see a not so distant future where we're growing up vats of these things, and the physician is really just prescribing, cell cocktail A, B, C, or D to their patient. So I think this is a highly translatable and scalable thing, but we need someone to do the bioinformatics to figure out what it is, and that's how I'm going to save the world.
I feel like you need a superhero outfit for that line of work. All right, thank you. Dr. Rock, your question. Why are those in Atlantic Canada at higher risk than the rest of the country for oral cancer? And what biomarkers are being detected?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it. And the short answer is, we don't know. The burden of cancer in Atlantic Canada is disproportionately higher for all cancers. It's not unique to oral cancer, and the same is true for oral cancer. And the answer to the question is complex, and it most likely involves many different things. It possibly, some factors that could be coming into play is there are higher incidents of smoking in Atlantic Canada compared to the rest of the country. Alcohol consumption might be related, but there could also be social issues at play. There could be issues surrounding access to care. There could be issues surrounding environmental, diet, access to healthy food and healthy diet. There's so many questions, and the fact is it is going to take a very multidisciplinary approach in order to be able to unravel that. And to that end, I would like to take this opportunity to kind of float a little bit of an exciting proposition in why our faculty is starting to feel a real growing sense of why Dalhousie is absolutely perfectly poised to become a Center for Oral Cancer Excellence. And this is an idea that we're really beginning to champion. Not only do we have all of the correct people here, we have dentists across the way, hygienists, we have oral maxillofacial surgeons, we have oral medicine specialists, we have oral pathologists, we have very strong ties with our colleagues in medicine, the ENT surgeons, strong collaborations with mechanistic type of research. Biomaterials research, our biomaterials researchers are looking at cancer therapies, and we have a growing strong ties with various social researchers as well, and strong ties with the Beatrice Hunter Cancer Research Institute and the hospital across the street. And we happen to be sitting in a location that has some of the highest incidences of oral cancer, and I think it's time for us to rise to the occasion. And we're beginning to champion and socialize this idea, and are really getting excited about asking people to join us. So that's the answer about, why is the the rate of oral cancer so high here in Atlantic Canada? And as I said, the short answer is we don't know. In terms of biomarkers that are being detected, like most cancer research, the research in oral cancer is beginning to look to genetic and genomic markers. And at the moment, it's the usual players, you know, the tumor suppressor genes, P16, P53, those sorts of ones. We've looked at some clinical pathological biomarkers, including ones called telluridine blue and fluorescence visualization. And these are basically a vital dye that you can use to detect risk, or optics that can be used to detect risk. But those have really been shown to have fairly good sensitivity but relatively poor specificity. So the search for good biomarkers continues, and one of the areas that my lab is now currently exploring as a potential biomarker in collaboration with some fantastic collaborators here in the Faculty of Medicine and the Integrated Microbiome Resource is to begin to explore the microbiome as a biomarker. And that may seem like a little bit of a stretch as well, but you know, over the years since H. pylori has been identified as a causative agent for gastric cancer and human papillomavirus being a causative agent for certain oropharyngeal and cervical cancers, we now know that there's no doubt that the microbiome plays either a direct role or more likely an indirect role in terms of altering the tumor microenvironment. And so that's what's new and cutting edge for biomarkers.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rock. So now we'll go online with Dr. Rockwood's question. So Dr. Rockwood, one of the main reasons for disproportionate use of the healthcare system is by seniors because of frailty. With an aging population, what can be done to change the impact?
Right. As I was indicating, is the fact that we have more people with more things wrong, and the problems of old age come as a package. And the leading edge of the baby boom began to turn 75 in 2021. So it's not an imagination. We're seeing more people with multiple problems. So the first thing we need to do is we have to organize ourselves to provide care that's more appropriate to their needs right from the moment that they come to the hospital. And from a hospital perspective, that means some reorganization in the information that we gather and what we recognize to be important. So for example, a common characteristic of a frail older adult who becomes acutely unwell, particularly if they've got any underlying degree of impaired memory and thinking, is that they'll get very confused as part of the illness. And so we need to have ways that recognize that don't sort of write them off as a poor historian, and that we have a sensible approach to investigating what might be the cause of this. And then what we need to do is to admit them to hospital wards in which we're able to work with them even though we recognize that there's cognitive impairment present, and we don't look to give them medications that will make things worse, not better, and so on and so on. There's a list of those things. So we need to embed that in our routine care. We need to embed in the routine care that we're going to get people up and mobilize them. And fortunately, we've just gotten the go-ahead with a mobilization strategy that will allow that to happen, and is being rolled out over the next few months. We need as well to identify not just what they're like at the moment that we see them in the hospital, but what they were like 2 weeks ago. Acute illness has a way to homogenize what everybody living with any degree of frailty looks like, but there will be vast differences in what they were like 2 weeks ago, and we need to know what that was. By knowing what that was, we are able to fulfill our part of what for most people is the implicit contract of going to the hospital when they're ill, which is to say they reckon they're going to get better in some way. And they typically are very realistic in their expectations. They're not looking to go back to some far state where everything was good for them. So we need to have ways that we identify that, because we can't meet our contract if we don't know what their baseline state was. If we don't know what it is that might be success for them, we won't be able to mobilize interventions that are needed for that to happen. And then we need to have an organized system whereby we recognize that what we offer and what's needed, there may well be some negotiation needed for that in order to get the person home. And we anticipate that right from the outset and make sure that we're building in terms of what the plan for care is, that we're building in realistic expectations and then a means whereby we can get them there. This sounds so much like common sense that most people find it hard to believe that's not what happens now till they've actually been to hospital with a loved one and seen the dilemmas that many older people and families come up against. So it requires a full-throated effort to understand frailty and its impact on care. And old people don't choose to get sick in the way that they do. They get sick the only way that they know how. And so we have to make sure that we're able to meet them in this diversity of need that doesn't fit the classical model of coming in with one thing wrong, having it being reasonably readily identified, getting better in a short period of time, and going home to a loving family. And where all those things break down, we need to take responsibility for having a system that allows us to meet those needs. So in terms of what we need to do, it's organization at that level of the hospital. Obviously, there's things we need to do before people get to hospital. Potentially, too, there's things we can do usefully that will help with prevention. But as a general proposition, we need to focus on the care of frail older adults as worthy, dignified consumers of care whose need we have to change in order for going to meet those needs appropriately. I can be more specific if anyone wants.
That's great. So thank you, Dr. Rockwood. So as an occupational therapist who primarily worked in hospitals with older adults, a lot of what you've just described really resonates for me, and how we can actually do better to serve our communities of elders and those doing the preventative medicine as much. Yes, hear, hear. Okay, so we're going to move to our audience questions, and I'm being sent them by text, so I promise you I'm not checking Twitter or anything like that. Okay, so the first question is for each of the panelists. What do you identify as the biggest barrier to knowledge translation in your field? And what collaborations or collaborators would you like to see developed? So I'll flip the script and start with Dr. Rockwood and go the opposite way this time. If that's okay with you, Dr. Rockwood?
Yeah, so I think the biggest barrier to knowledge translation is attitude, right? We have, a lot of healthcare is still at an adolescent phase in which they look at these people and they don't see them as being legitimate consumers of healthcare. This person shouldn't be here. They should be at some other magic hospital, or I should go to the magic hospital where only young people get sick and should show up, which is the model of privatization, by the way. So we, the challenge we face is not simply a challenge of knowledge. There are skill sets that we need routinely that we often don't have, but none of that will work if we aren't working with people with a glad heart. This can be a vicious cycle. If you don't know what to do, you have nothing to offer other than frustration. If you do know what to do, then this is an extremely joyful, happy, cheery, rewarding job. And so how we get people to take on board that they're the ones who need to know more to look after the patients. There's things that they can do that will be very helpful, but it can't be haphazard. It needs to be done in a systematic way. So attitude has been a big challenge. And I have to tell you, I have been asked to provide advice on this with every government since Buchanan. And it is just an amazing thrill to work with the government right now that seriously seems to be involved in fostering the change that we need if we're going to make the headway that is demanded of us.
Great, thank you. So we'll go to Dr. Rock, and if any of the panelists would like me to repeat the question, I will do so.
Knowledge translation.
Knowledge translation, what's the barrier to that, and what collaborations or collaborators would you like to see developed?
It's a fantastic question. So, when I think of knowledge translation and I think of knowledge mobilization, that is a barrier for myself. It's a completely separate skill set, and one that I really value, someone who has formal expertise and training in knowledge mobilization. It's difficult enough being a scientist, a researcher, an educator, and then knowing how to have that additional skill set to get your findings to policymakers, to clinicians, so that they actually are truly translational and make it from bench side to bedside or to chair side. I've had fairly decent luck with my own work in terms of moving things along translationally, but I think the key is collaboration and networking and finding those people who have that very, very important skill that I myself don't necessarily have.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. Dr. Boudreau.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I have been shocked having conversations. Usually it's from my end, it's with the physicians, and they say, well, we don't feel like we're smart enough to talk to the PhDs. And the PhDs will say, well, we don't think we're good enough to talk to the physicians, and then nobody talks to each other, which is, sort of a bonkers thing.
After that, afterward.
Well, and then nobody talks to the engineer.
Nobody talks to
So I do think, as we're kind of approaching this question of what do we need to be able to do better, I agree it's totally collaboration, right? So it's meaningful collaboration, not just a name on your granting application or whatever, but these ongoing networks of people who are working together, who are not necessarily competing with each other for the same pots of money, but recognizing that we all have a role to play in this space. And Dr. Rock mentioned the Beatrice Hunter Cancer Research Institute, which networks together all of the folks in Atlantic Canada from the different provinces and hopefully provides a platform to talk. But one of the things I think we could be doing better is, increasing the communications between those groups at steady state, not specifically around any one, particular call. I don't know what's happening. It's not my cell phone.
It's not mine either, so yeah.
It's double jeopardy.
And you win a car, and you win a car. Okay, here we
and
go.
a collaboration. No, I mean, I will say that, that there are a few of these starting to come out, but the classic funding model that we run on is a model where we apply for grants and we compete with each other, and the vast majority of us don't get a grant in any one competition. So we spend a lot of time writing more grants, right, instead of doing research, which is the thing we're supposed to be good at. So I think we sort of have to move toward a space where we say, recognize each other's strengths, and we're all a little more secure drawing from the same pot of expertise. I don't know how we do that, but that's what I would like to work toward.
All right, so onward with that joke about nobody talked to us. That's starting to change, and I would say the biggest challenge for us is validation. So a model, it's no good if we make it and we don't talk to the clinician, the scientist, to ask the question, are we making the right thing, right? And this is a huge issue. You see cancer model system being published almost every single day, yet 99.9% of those don't translate to even a basic science lab, let alone being in drug trials and using it to answer tough questions. I can give you a quick example. All the biomarker, for example, people find out on microbiome, what types of bacteria do we associate them with. We have a lot of data on association, but there are very few models that actually look at mechanistically, does that bacteria cause the disease or condition that we think, right? So I'm doing a project now in my lab looking at the oral bacteria, really looking at which one of them causes ulceration or stop ulceration, and we're building model system to do that. And we talk to the oral pathologist to make sure that we're building the system right. The endpoint, sort of the assay of how we analyze them, are actually what they use in the pathology lab as well. We talk to the microbiologist to make sure that the bugs that we use are not just bugs that we can buy, but bugs that actually come from patient's mouth, right? So we try to get validated as close to the real thing as we can, but the bottom line comes back to two-way or multi-way communication, right? That when we mix up something, we go back to the user and ask them, did we make it right? And what else would you like to see? And we make a different version of it. So it's not a make it once and then, publish a paper and that's it. So I think that's the challenge.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll move on to the next question from our audience. And I believe this is for all of the panelists here. Or maybe somebody has the better expertise, but here we go. How do patients access precision medicine? Are they consulted, or does it happen on their behalf without them necessarily knowing? Would any of the panelists like to take that question?
I'm going to jump in and I don't know the full answer, and I don't know how you get precision medicine for cancer without strong advocates on your behalf. Mm-hmm. Certainly it's the physician that's going to bat for you for precision medicine, but I will take a step back and say that this is not a new concept. It's a new concept in the way that we're thinking about it now, but if you break your arm and you get a cast, or you go to an optometrist and you get a pair of glasses, that's already precision medicine, right? That's the physician giving you the best available tools for whatever is going on with you. And that's really all we're trying to do now. So how does the patient access it? I think they ask for it, but I think, our job is to equip the physicians with the tools that they need, the knowledge that they need, and ideally the time that they need to understand and, research it and understand it. Yeah.
I'll add to that response, like breaking an arm, for example, right? So, traditionally you might have, just one cast, and then that's just that one cast, no matter which part of the arm, which bone, right? So with modeling system, what we can do now is then looking at, which bone did you break? How long ago did you break it? How big is that break? That would determine, sort of add on, like, can we put this cast or, change the therapy duration? Can we add some bone grafting material to it? So we're filling in the gap in the middle with model system to understand sort of the better resolution of what a disease or a condition look like. So it's not just one thing, right? So many different subclass. Yeah, but that's more precision.
Anything to add, Dr. Rock?
No, I mean, there are some personalized oncogenomics that are going on. It depends upon the type of cancer, who your med-onc is. With breast cancer, they're doing pretty good jobs in terms of looking molecularly and guiding treatment that way. But once again, it depends upon who your clinician is and what access they have to sometimes cutting-edge experimental work.
Yeah. I know Dr. Rock's, they're trying to get him back online, but I would also just comment from a clinical standpoint that that collaborative care model is really important for patients so that you are kind of filling the knowledge gaps based on the different professions. So, working side by side with the physiotherapist, the physician, the pharmacist, et cetera, is really important to really hone in on, I think, some of what we would never really call precision care in the clinic, but I know in the bench maybe it is. But that collaboration, and I think each of you are also speaking to that collaborative model that is really important. Okay, let me go on to the next question. Would the new cancer therapies replace radiation therapy or any adjunct to RADS or radiation?
So when it comes to oral cancer, one of the more recent discoveries is that when the causative agent is a HPV-positive oral cancer, research has now shown that radiation therapy can be de-escalated because that particular cancer is very responsive to treatment and has a better prognosis. So that is some precision treatment that's come out of research for that specific type of cancer, can de-escalate radiation.
And I'll add to that there are immunologic reasons why things like that happen. So depending on the treatment that you're getting, the classic therapy, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, even surgery, has knock-on effects onto how the immune system's behaving, and it can be both good or bad. And so we're just starting to understand how that sort of operates in a way that we're trying to take advantage of it. So for example, low-dose radiation therapy for a patient with lung cancer can actually wake up the immune system and tell it to start fighting the cancer. So it's been doing that all along. We just didn't notice, right? So how do we make sure that we're making good use of that the whole way through? There are examples in cancers like melanoma, for example, where immunotherapy is becoming frontline. So I don't know if I'm comfortable saying it's going to totally take over classical therapy, but it is becoming more and more front and center in the treatment. The other thing that I'm really excited about immunotherapy-wise is that it's not replacing surgery, for example, and probably never will, but it is giving more patients a chance to go to surgery. So classic dogma is that a patient that has advanced disease is not going to be eligible for surgery. But now with some of these new treatments, we're able to push them backwards to a point where they do become surgical candidates. So I think that the new treatments, at least from the immunologic standpoint, are really more about looking how do we recruit the immune system in a productive way to help us make all the therapies work better and make more patients eligible for better treatments for them.
Yeah. And I'll just add a very small comment on what Dr. Pupajo was saying. The combinatorial way, it's a really good example of how we can have model system to test different combinations in a very safe and information-rich environment. So you can imagine if you have 3 different kinds of therapy, which one to give first, how long do you wait in between. There are lots of scenarios that we can set up and actually observe the cells, how on a cellular molecular level, how are they reacting to these combinations that cannot be easily observed, say, in a mouse, right? Because it's so big, you can't really see everything. Here is in a dish, we can see everything. So back to the models.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now on to the next question. How does advanced health research, such as you're doing, translate to better overall population health? Anyone want to start that one?
I will.
Okay.
So whenever I look at questions, I always look at this in this hourglass type of a model. What is the big question? How does my little tiny area of research answer this very, very narrow piece of information and just incrementally push the body of knowledge just a little bit further? And then usually at the end of the paper, I then have to come back out and say where my work fits into the big picture. And I think, hopefully what we've been able to parlay here this evening is we are about 4 researchers in the 3 health faculties here at Dal. And collectively, I think we are all each pushing that little bit of scientific body of knowledge incrementally further so that we can answer those big questions collectively, together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll add that I think we want to solve problems that are actually problems, which sounds really silly, but it's easy to be like to be a fundamental scientist and say, I'm going to cure cancer, right? Big dreams, right? But the reality is that a patient with cancer, maybe doesn't need a cure. Maybe they just don't want to spend the end of their life, suffering through painful treatments. Maybe, they would much rather take a drug that keeps them feeling well for longer so they can enjoy the rest of their life. That would be a good success, right? So if I, make that less abstract and I just say, maybe they don't want to deal with their dry eyes that they're getting because of their chemo, or maybe they don't want their hair to fall out, right? Like these are problems that, maybe we can solve one small problem at a time. And it's again through that collaboration that we hear that, right? Through our patient partners that say like, well, I really liked my PARP inhibitor and it worked, but now I can't see, right? So can we adjust the drug, for example, so that you get the good without the bad? And these are the types of problems that we can solve, but somebody needs to tell the scientists what the problems are so that we can build those systems. And so I think you can get to a place where healthcare is both more effective and delivering better outcomes for patients, and those aren't necessarily the same thing, right? Keeping a patient alive for longer so that they can have a terrible quality of life is not better healthcare. It's expensive and it's probably not what we need to aim at, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good analogy. I like Leah's analogy of the hourglassing and about asking the question, having the question translated from bedside to bench side and then into devices that we make, inventions. I think there are a lot of, when I first started getting involved in the cancer field, I thought that curing cancer is everything. But it seems like, the more and more that I, get in contact with patient, I'm probably the last person here in the panel to see them. But then the story that they tell and the problem really triggers a lot more question that can be solved concurrently with the disease, right? So to me, it always is the discovery of what is happening and can we innovate solution to solve them. And the more we know, the more innovation we can provide. So I think it's, from our perspective, it's just keep pumping out innovations that clinicians can use and basic scientists can use. Yeah, which helps everybody.
Excellent. So I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and then I'm going to take the privilege to ask more of a rapid fire question of my own. That's fair. It's going to be good. Okay, so from the audience, this is for each of the panelists. What do you identify as the most rewarding part of your work? And what advice would you give someone looking to pursue a career in health research?
Can I start first?
You may.
Okay. So as somebody who's a little bit more removed from health research, I think the most rewarding part is knowing how all the parts of sciences are connected. So I have a lot of students that come to me and say, I have a background in chemistry. Can I do health research? I'm like, sure. I have a background in physics. Can I do it? Sure. To me, everything boils down to the same pot of basic scientific principles and phenomenons. They're all related. So I said, I just have to explain the cancer problem to you in a physical way if you are a physicist, or in a chemistry way. And then to see these almost opening their mind, to say, oh, I can contribute to solving health problem using my knowledge in physics, chemistry, biology, or some non-traditional stuff. It's fantastic. And that's personally something that I do every single day. I try to get my student to do that. So that is sorry, I forgot your question. What is it?
Let me look at it. It was, okay, what is
I'm trying to wrap it up and answer the
okay.
question.
What is the most rewarding part of your work?
Yes, that is the most rewarding part.
That's the one.
Yeah. Sorry, a tangent off. I'm like, did I answer the question? Sorry.
I'm glad you asked.
I went to you.
The most rewarding part of my job. I don't know, there's lots of good parts. I think the discovery part is fun. There's something really cool about being the first person to know something, or to I'm wrong a lot, but every now and then I get something right. And that 5 a.m., you look at the results of the thing you did yesterday and realize that you actually did something and you figured something out, that's a pretty cool feeling. And then, getting to know that you have a mechanism to spend your days answering questions and trying to find answers to stuff while training new, brilliant, enthusiastic minds, and being able to honestly look patients and funders in the eye and say, we really are trying and there are better things coming. I think that's pretty cool.
So for myself, the most rewarding aspect of my work, and I find it's a privilege, and I use that word very, very purposefully, of being a researcher, a scientist who was allowed to be in the lab, be doing all of that wet lab work, and then run across the street to the hospital and interact with patients. That is absolutely rewarding, and as I said, I say that very purposefully. Now, my RA will tell you that the thing I absolutely love the most about science is statistics and numbers and finding patterns in numbers. I am a huge data geek, and I love data, I love statistics, and I will say data saves lives. It really does. In terms of the next generation and someone who might be interested in getting into research, that's actually a really easy question for me to answer, and I'm so passionate about it, and I've said it probably 10, 20, 30 times, haven't I, Lindsay? You do not need to be smart to be a scientist and a researcher, believe it or not. What you need is to be curious. If you're curious, that is the #1 predictor of who will make a good researcher, and the second quality you need to have is tenacity, because it's rough and you will face so much delays and disappointment. And if you have those two things, you're probably going to be fantastic at it.
Excellent response. So I have a question, and it really does need to be rapid fire, 1-sentence response.
Oh no.
Oh no. So, in a sentence, could you define the optimal health outcome you aim to achieve, and one key thing that will help you get there?
How many semicolons can I
How many semicolons? I'll give you 2 sentences. But how would you define an optimal health outcome from your research? I see Dr. Rockwood's back with us, and whoever. Okay, let's start with Dr. Rockwood.
He had his hand.
So our main goal is to allow people to die happier, and by that, in that way, to die for the most part healthier. And it looks like there's many things we can do to intervene with frailty that improve the degree of frailty, but have a very minimal impact on the quality of life. And our plan is to pursue that more.
That is a really deep answer and very succinct. Thank you. From other panelists?
For mine, it's hard to summarize, but I would say early detection, and how am I hoping to achieve that? Biomarkers.
Okay, great. Those K cells got to cut, right?
Well, no, everybody gets NK cells.
It's NK cell. Right.
No, I mean, I think I agree with the other two panelists, right? It's allowing people to enjoy a better, dignified quality of life for longer, and being able to deliver that in an equitable way to people. How am I going to get there? I don't know, lots of collaboration and research, and probably NK cells.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I echo everything that she said, plus I saved myself a sentence. Exactly. But it's really to look into the current practice, look in between them, and see where we can have discovery that can change how we do things, paradigm shift, because there's many things that are not working, and for me the better outcome would come from really changing how we do things and accepting those new changes.
Excellent. So I think we have time for a 1 minute kind of final comment from each of the panelists. So I'll start again with Dr. Rockwood. Any final comments you would like to make?
Sure. You can't be a geriatrician without being optimistic, and you can't do policy work or you probably shouldn't do policy work without being ambitious. So I think that people who have a combination of ambition and optimism, want to join in this work, this is a huge societal push that's needed now, and I hope that we would be able to get support from a broad range of people to bring about the change in attitude, approach, and skill sets that's needed to succeed here.
Great, thank you. Dr. Rock?
So what's really struck me, and I'm excited, Dal is poised to make a significant role in advancing health outcomes, not just locally, but nationally and globally as well. I hope that people are excited by what we've presented. I hope and encourage people to be curious, as I've already said. And what I would like to take my closing comments is to invite the audience, whether they're here with us in person or whether they're with us online, to play a role, get involved in our work. We want to invite you to support this research, and together, incrementally, we can push this body of knowledge just a little tiny bit further. There are so many different ways that you can support research. And I encourage you, if any of our work interests you, there's people here to talk to tonight. I know that each of us would love nothing more than to talk about our work and how you can become involved in our work.
Excellent. Dr. Boudreau?
That was really good. Yeah, I mean, I echo that, right? I think that I guess if I go back to my, I'm not good enough to speak to the clinicians joke, which is actually really true. I think we need to just break down the barriers, allow ourselves, the vulnerability to say, these are the limits of my knowledge and this is how I would like to work with other people. And when the opportunities present themselves, engage with people and be brave enough to go into situations where, maybe you don't feel 100% like the expert in the room, but, be willing to ask questions, be willing to answer questions if you're somebody with, lived experience, and, sort of be open to collaborating. I think if there's any funding agencies or government folk listening, there's probably some remodeling of the way that we fund and support science to be considered. I think that's probably also true in the way that medicine and healthcare are delivered. The way patients navigate through the system and gain access to care probably needs some navel gazing and possibly some remodeling that's not just simply implementing iterative change, but in an era where we have tons of information and knowledge, we should, put it to good use in an electronic and modernized way, I think.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So everything that she said again. But really, this I am continuing to be encouraged by this, by the collaboration of health researcher with non-traditional health researcher and engineers, physical scientists, and I think there's continue to be great discovery to be made there. And I think it's I'm a big supporter of this Big Tent model system. Healthcare and medicine is not this mystical thing that only physician or people in biology can do. There's really many aspects of it. It's a chemical system, it's a physical system. I want a researcher of all background to participate, and I see that every single day in our faculty in my lab. So I'm continuing to be very excited about that. STEM, yay.
Okay. Excellent. So I'll wrap us up because I'm mindful of everybody's time. Thank you to the panelists. Really excellent discussion, and your passion definitely shines through in how we advance health. And as I said earlier in the evening, we have one of the largest constellation of health programs and health researchers right here at Dalhousie. And this is just a sample of what we're doing and the passion that we bring to advancing health. And I think if there's anybody that has questions, we're happy to help find the right person for you to connect with. But I thank you, and I thank our online audience as well, and good evening. Well done, team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank goodness for sitting beside me.